Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second installment of NYU Law CLX's webinar series, Litigating the Climate Emergency, What's Next? In this series, we'll hear from scholars, practitioners, judges, advocates, and activists at the forefront of the human rights and climate change field. To chart the future of this dynamic field, we'll look backwards to look forward, assessing the current state of the field and its past wins and losses, while charting future directions for action. In this particular webinar, we'll hear from youth activists and plaintiffs who will recount their experiences with rights-based climate litigation in different jurisdictions around the world and examine the role climate litigation plays in both the youth climate movement and in securing climate action more broadly. Before we begin, a note on resources that CLX has for the field. The CLX toolkit is up and running. It provides tools for the field, including a casebook with case studies of important rights-based climate cases, key takeaways, and strategies for legal action. And the book Litigating the Climate Emergency is also has been published in English and in Spanish. I'm putting the links to both in the chat box right now. Let's see. All right, on to today's session. And today, outstanding young climate advocates. First, Solomon Yu was one of the 27 law students who in 2019 formed the Pacific Island Students Fighting Climate Change, or PISFCC, at the University of the South Pacific, Vanuatu. He is now working as the campaign director of the organization and is supporting the leadership of the student body in their collective efforts to take the world's biggest problem to the world's highest. Ridhima Pandey is a 15-year-old climate activist from India and has been campaigning on climate change since 2017. She was mentioned on BBC's list of 100 most influential and empowering women, has received Sanctuary Asia's Young Naturalist Award and the Mother Teresa Memorial Award for Environmental Conservation, and has been a TEDx speaker. She is also currently a cast member in the film The Let, which premiered at Vatican City this October. And Laura Jimenez is a historian and currently pursuing a master's degree in history. She works at the University of Antioquia as a research assistant on a project examining civilian self-protection strategies in violent contexts. Laura was one of the 25 plaintiffs in the Future Generations versus Columbia climate case. Before beginning, note that we'll have time at the end for Q&A, so if you have questions, please submit them in the Q&A box at the bottom panel. So to kick off, we'll start with Solomon. Can you tell us a little bit about the campaign for the ICJ advisory opinion, including the objectives of the campaign and what you hope an advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice would accomplish?
Thank you, Jackie, and good morning to you all. Going to share a little bit about that campaign. Perhaps I can take you back all of where it started. So back in 2019, myself and my other colleagues at the law school at the University of South Pacific in Vanuatu decided to do something quite exciting for our final year of law students. Of course, we decided that we wanted to contribute as well to our region and our countries. What's the best way we can do this? And of course, that begins with an issue. So to us, the biggest issue is very obvious from the start. It is climate change. So as repeatedly highlighted by the leaders, that the climate crisis is a single greatest threat facing our region, and now it's posing an existential threat to add to that. And what I mean by existential threat is that the fact that in the Pacific we are seeing that there is now there's already been cases of human rights violations due to the adverse effects of climate change. You can see people in communities, people in the coastal area facing deprived of their basic human rights, such as the right to water, right to shelter, and all the others. But in terms of responses on the ground, we are seeing that it's been quite lacking. most of the times responses in the Pacific have been very band-aid, where you have parachute consultants come in telling us what to do, providing legislation policies that doesn't even work, or they're saying that we'll give you grant and funding, but turns out it's all concessional in its forms. So further plunging us deeper and deeper into climate debt with no realistic outlook into the future of how we can really emerge as countries that can be self-sustaining, but continuously be trapped in this cycle. So it's not just how this whole mechanics, seeing how climate change is impacting human rights in the Pacific, but also the entire society as a whole, as just slightly touching on that. What we see that is quite missing is the human rights aspects, human rights approaches to climate change, especially in the Pacific. And looking outwards, there is also a lack of human rights-based approaches to climate change by governments and stakeholders until just recently, but it's still not enough in terms of the frequency and in terms of the magnitude that it requires to be able to meet that. So we also think that if we were to push for addressing this issue, we shouldn't be talking about how can we, push for a band-aid solution. We need to go beyond that. We need to have a real global solution that can really address the climate crisis, not just in the Pacific, but elsewhere in the world. So through our research, we came across the campaign, formerly attempted by one of our Pacific governments as well, two of our Pacific governments, Palau government and Marshall Islands, back in 2011. Unfortunately, they did not succeed, but what they left was something very interesting that, of course, now picked up by, first from us, the Pacific youth students, and then with our governments now, which is to request an UN resolution, to seek a UN resolution requesting an advisory opinion on climate change from the International Court of Justice. So what is the objectives of this campaign? It's really just to clarify first that I understand that it's really easy to say climate litigation in this context, but it is not. And it's not a contentious case as we see in contentious proceedings where you have state suing another state. No, this is the seeking advisory opinion is merely just a process or function of the court that the court can clarify on a legal issue that has been put forward. And in our case, that is climate change that we're trying to get it through to the ICJ. Of course, you look throughout the UN bodies, the General Assembly is, of course, repeatedly mentioned climate change. You look at Security Council, they have mentioned climate change, of course, taking some actions as well. But out of all of the UN bodies, the International Court of Justice, which is the principal judicial organ, has been silent so far. And they have been silent where they could have provided a great assistance in terms of addressing climate change in a global landscape. Unfortunately, to get there, in order to trigger the services of the International Court of Justice, it requires to go through some certain processes, and that's what Palau and Marshall Islands government have attempted, but you can see it's politically difficult to get that to that stage. So moving on, the role of the court in the AOs is really just to clarify the legal obligations of state under international law and treaties, and also to highlight some of the obligation that is that are resulting out of this understanding. Sorry, and they could also highlight the legal consequences for breaching these obligations, of course, and to reflect the correct interpretation of what is deemed legal and what is deemed illegal, or not legal. And this is where the court comes in handy. But of course, advisory opinions are, despite they're not legally binding upon states, as I've said, just like clarifying courts, but they carry great legal and moral authority. I think moral because as the principal judicial organ of the UN, and legally because the international law and treaties and obligation that they're interpreting are actually legally binding. So it's nothing new, or not trying to create new law or trying to introduce new law or whatever. It's just really just to clarify what exists in international law and what obligations are coming out from that. So that is precisely what we're trying to seek. As at the moment, what is, excuse me, whether state deliberately don't want to know to confirm or acknowledge the obligations, or there is really, states don't really know what the obligations are in terms of climate change. under international law. So having the interpretation of the court would really help clarify all of this. So another part of Jackie's question is that what would it achieve? I think there's so much that I can talk about right here, but perhaps I can just divide it into two benefits. I think coming back to the issue of climate change is that because international law develops an incremental and piecemeal approach, it has led to a differentiation now between different areas of law, such as being climate change law and human rights law. So the fact that international climate law arose from really environmental treaty processes, but the climate negotiation have provided, especially at COP, Conference of Parties, UNFCCC negotiation, have provided the backbone of such processes have really not been addressed or only have been marginally addressed. And many of the important legal questions arising from climate change have still remained unanswered. So here is where International Court of Justice Advisory Opinion is really helped to hear great evidence of law and of fact, of course, when the case is being brought before them. And then it can help provide assistance in integrating human rights law and climate change law. And this would in turn enhance the effectiveness of international legal system in tackling climate change, as well as bolstering the authority of human rights bodies to address climate change under their respective mandates, and really to operationalize. And this is something that's very important to the students that we initiated the campaign, the principle of intergenerational equity and how that would apply in government's approach to address climate justice. As we're heading into COP, I think one thing to really highlight is the benefit that it will add to the Paris Agreement negotiations. I think one is to be clear that there are significant gaps in the Paris Agreement, such as in ambition, accountability, and ambition and fairness. So these are areas that customary international law principles, such as harm prevention and the duty of due diligence clarifies by clarifying from the court and applying it into that sense could give a little bit of guidance. Of course, this is not an attempt to undermine or push away the Paris Agreement. It's really just to strengthen it, as it is still the primary way of negotiating in a global effort. Another benefit that it can do is, I think this is more relevant, more closely relevant to this webinar, is it could really provide impetus for guidance for domestic and regional and international adjudications. So ICJ, on finding the implication of climate change from an international law perspective, would be really a great authority in future relevant proceedings before international courts, tribunals, or even domestic or regional courts. While its domestic legal systems adopt its own approaches to international authorities and case precedents, such finding before the ICJ could be influential towards domestic climate litigation and encouraging more claimants to bring matters before national courts and guiding the latter in their ultimate determinations. So advisory opinions therefore could help develop the law and guide how it might really apply in subsequent judicial proceedings and perhaps ongoing judicial proceedings as well, depending on how many are going since the advisory opinions then is concluded. And of course, is all in efforts to return to accelerate more equitable private and state action in order to avoiding and of course responding to the climate crisis that we face today. So those are just some few things that I could highlight and share today. Thank you.
Great, thanks for that really helpful overview of the campaign, Solomon. And switching gears a little bit to the Indian context, Ridhima, can you tell us a little bit about your experience approaching the courts in India for environmental issues?
So, I mean, for me, I approached the court when I was really very little, so I didn't really knew, how the court worked and, was it difficult or, I didn't really knew anything. The only thing that I knew was that, I learned about climate change and I knew that it is impacting my generation the most and it is impacting the kids the most. And I wanted some actions because I saw the government and I saw the older generation basically just destroying each and everything out there present in India, which should be conserved. in order for their profits and for their gains. And no one was basically thinking about how their actions were going to impact us in the future. So, I mean, for me, when I approached the court, I was 9 years old. And I mean, I didn't know, because as a kid, we are not really never taught. I mean, for me itself, I was never taught that, if I feel something is wrong, I can approach a court myself. I thought that back then, when I was just thinking about, why not have a lawsuit? Like, why not have a complaint against the government? At that point of time, what I was thinking was, whether am I, eligible to do a petition or not? Because for a 9 year old, I didn't know. I just thought that only 18 years old were, only adults were the one, how things started for me. And personally, when I started, I can say I many things in my mind in terms of, yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, you froze for like a minute, so or like a few seconds. So maybe just go back a little bit and then start over.
Okay, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, but yeah, I was saying that, I guess we are not really never thought of, kids that yes, it is you can do a petition and stuff like that. And for me, when I approached the court, I can say, I mean, I was really interested. I was really kind of like, into the entire thing, because what I thought was that, once you do a petition at the court, the court basically takes the action, does what is right, and in my case, I thought that the court would take action against the government, and the government would start working in a right way, and things would be solved. No more climate change, and no more kids dying, no more nightmares and everything, and things are going to be fine. So that sort of is how my entire imagination started with the lawsuit. And I mean, when the lawsuit started, it went pretty well. I mean, there were like hearings were happening, and my lawyers were going to the court, and there were representatives from the government side as well, and a lot was happening. We had like really many hearings and everything. But what I can say is that at the very end, we came to this conclusion of that, the National Green Tribunal, basically, where I filed the petition, they just said that the government was doing everything right by seeing the paperwork. So the initial thing that like with the initial sort of context that we reached the court was that, that I wanted the court to take action against the government because the government was not doing work on ground, but instead on paper itself. So what's the point of seeing the paper and saying that yes, they're doing their very best, when it is clearly mentioned within the petition that the government was not working on the ground? So I mean, for me, I feel like, the courts within, I don't know if it's just my country, but yeah, within the UN system as well, I can say, as many petitions as I've been part of, I feel like, they just see the paperwork, they just see what's been presented to them, not going too deep into all these things. And, it's just a matter of fact that, they have to dismiss the case after a few hearings. And that's what happened with my case as well. It was dismissed after 1.5 years. And to be honest, that was the point of time when, I was really very sort of, sad, disheartened, because I thought things are going to be solved when I go to the court. But then we took it to the Supreme Court, and it's still been pending there for like 2-3 years now. It's not been, up for hearing for like very, very long. So, I mean, back then during COVID, the government, like the court was only taking the like the cases which were really important. So it clearly shows that within the court system as well, climate change is something which is not considered as important as other matters. And yeah, I mean, for my experience, I can say it started from, imagining a lot and expecting a lot, and then coming to the end, just being, sort of stuck within this case, because I did this petition when I was 9. Today I'm 15, and the case is just still pending. So there has been no action. So yeah, that sort of is how my whole experience has been, filing a petition against the government.
Great. Yeah, thanks for that insightful view into, like the limits of using courts to pursue climate and environmental action. Yeah, it's really helpful. Okay, great. So we'll switch gears one more time and head to Laura for the Colombian context. Can you tell us a little bit, Laura, about the Amazon's Future Generations case and what your experience as a plaintiff was and where you think the case succeeded and also perhaps fell short?
Okay, an insight from this case was that we were 25 young people and some kids, and we joined to the Justicia, that is an ONG in Colombia. This was one of the first climate litigations in Colombia, and it was the first involving future generations. We sued the Colombian government because we saw that the deforestation rate was increasing since 2016, and we argue in front of the court that the government wasn't doing anything. And we told them, like, the problem with this is that if deforestation increases, there will be many problems related to climate change, and we wanted to take care of the Amazon jungle, that is one of the most strategic ecosystems in the world, especially in Colombia, because it is the half of our territory. It's like 46% or something, 46% or something like that. And in the first instance, the judge said, like, you don't have I mean, he didn't rule in our favor, so we went to the Supreme Court, and they say, like, yeah, you are right, you need to do something about what is happening right now. And they ruled in our favor, but it was, I mean, Ridima say, like, yeah, we are stuck in this case, but yeah, in Colombia, they rule in our favor, but we're still stuck in their case too. It was in 2018, and now in 2022, anything has happened. I mean, they are trying to implement the rule, but it's hard because it involves like 19 state entities, and they don't coordinate each other, and there is a new problem in every government. Every 4 years they say, like, no, we're doing anything because it was a problem from the past government, and now that we are starting a new government, we're having this issue. They aren't doing anything because they say, like, no, we're just starting this how do you say it, like, this period, and we're like, okay, so this is the way things are gonna be the next 4 years again. And it feels like Sisyphus, like this myth of the Greek, because you roll up the boulder for 4 years, and when the period is over, it comes back to the top of the hill again, and is very stressing. It make you feel like you can do anything. So it's problematic because some people say, like, okay, climate litigation is a way, and yeah, it's a way, but it's not the best way either. But you should do something so you can stop of doing climate litigation, but you should know that maybe it can be, it feels like I don't know, fighting against something that you don't see, because it's like an invisible enemy. And that's what's right now we are in the implementation of the failure. I don't know if I said it well, but it's been hard because it's been like 5 years and there is no advance, and it's hard to see the way things happen. And there is other thing that is hard, and the group of people is getting older. The youngest kid was 6 in that moment, now he's 11, and the oldest was 26, now he's 30, 31 or something like that. And some people say like, I don't want to be more in this case. I feel anxiety. I don't want to know what is happening. So from the group of 25, right now we're like 10 who care about the case. So it's hard in that way.
Right. So thank you for that. Another really helpful insight into the limits of pursuing this type of action, especially at the implementation phase. So we've heard from Solomon about some of the potential advantages of pursuing climate action through the courts. Also heard about the limitations of securing that action, and even when you do, about implementation from Redima and Laura. So the next question I have is for all of you, and then it's what do you all think the role of rights-based climate litigation, or just climate litigation in general, should be in trying to secure urgent climate action in the time we've left and advance climate and environmental justice? And we can start maybe with Redima and then go to Laura and then maybe end with Solomon on this question.
Okay, so I feel like, within these litigations, I feel like if done in a right way, there could be a lot that we can achieve. Because even if, the case is a success or it's a failure, there is no use unless, we do the things that we really, cared about, and, why, just to see that why at the very first, we approached the court. Because, Laura said that, it just makes you feel like, that you're fighting against something, but it just feels like, it's nothing. Basically, it just feels like you're banging your fist against a wall, and it's just hurting you, but not making anything. It's just like, it's not really doing anything to the wall. And, it's time that we really change those things. So, I feel like, all these litigations specifically related to climate change or related to, impacts of climate change, or, the things that are, sort of boosting climate change. I feel like, all these things could be something which could be really helpful towards, in terms of, fighting this crisis in a way. Because at the same time, if a court do take right action within a right period, not taking years as, in our cases, but in terms, considering that, yes, climate change is something that needs our urgent action. So, taking all those cases which are related to climate change and, working on them sincerely in a way that, giving up justice, basically, that's why we go to the courts, right? So, sort of, working on all these kind of cases in a rightful way, and sort of at the same time, seeing and monitoring in terms of whether it's against the government or anyone else, whether, whom it is against, whether they are working in a proper way or not, or if they are not, then, there should be certain measures, certain actions that we should take against those people. Because at the very end, it could be something like, Laura's case, like, they did succeeded, they did said, that we have to do something, but at the very end, the governments just make, sort of different excuses every single time for each government, and things just never really seem to be accelerating, and we don't want those things. So in terms of when these kind of things happen, I feel like, it is important that, the court has certain kind of a way to work within this framework as well. But yeah, I feel like it could really change the way things are working right now in terms, because they do make the guidelines, and what the court says needs to be followed by the government or the people itself. So I feel like, it can really help us make people change the way they're doing, or, to stop them from, destroying what they're doing. But yeah, that sort of depends on, how fast action is happening and how greatly it has been implemented on ground. And if not, then what actions are being taken against those who are not implementing it.
Great. Yeah. Thank you for that overview and that insight. Okay, great. So same question to you, Laura.
Mm, I think that even when it could be a failure in climate litigation cases, or when you feel like you're doing nothing, it is important to keep doing these things because, for example, here in Colombia, there is like a legal mechanism. It is called acción de tutela. It was the legal mechanism that we used, and it makes that if the judge say, yeah, you're right, the entity that you demanded have to take urgent actions to protect your fundamental rights. I mean, we use the most urgent mechanism in the legal system in Colombia, and it didn't happen anything. But for example, what I saw in that moment was that it raised awareness about what was happening in the Amazon jungle, because yeah, we were in the middle of a peace agreement with one of the most oldest gorillas in the world, and everyone was talking about it. But we say like, okay, it is important, but in the Amazon is happening this because of that agreement, because people in the south of Colombia said like FARC, that it was the guerrilla, said like, yes, they were like the armed Greenpeace because they protect those ecosystems, and now they are not there. So what is going to happen? The government has to go there and make presence and to take care of those territories, and they're not doing anything. So it raised awareness in that moment about a problem that people weren't they didn't know that it was happening. And it took all the media in Colombia. It was a huge case. Right now it's like a stock, like we said the last time. But now we're still, sometimes we go to the media and we say like, yeah, it's happening this. So in time to time, it makes people to remember what is happening, because it is still a problem. And I mean, there are many ways to fight against the climate change, and there is people who protest, and there is people who investigate or research about the problem. And I think that climate litigation is a legitimate way because it uses the legal system that is at the end legitimate in every country of the world, at least in paper. So it is important to use all the tools we have to try to do something, even when it's hard, or when you feel like you're doing nothing.
Great. Yeah, that's a important reminder. So yeah, that's and then yes, pass it last to Solomon. Same question. What do you think the role of climate litigation should be in advancing climate action and climate justice?
Okay, thank you. Are you able to hear me better now?
It's okay, yeah.
Sorry about that. Okay, I'll try to come as close to the computer as I can to get the volume up. Right, so I appreciate the previous speakers' contributions, and I really, of course, it's really preaching to the choir here, all in converted, and really supportive of this arguments. And just to add to that rich arguments that they have made, is this: I think the role of climate litigation is really to, why there's even climate litigation to begin with, is this to acknowledge the understanding that we have made our voice very clear to our governments. Around the world, we said, look, climate change is a big issue. It is going to affect us all, or it's already affected us all, and you need to do something about it. And then responses that we're getting from the governments has not been the one that we wanted. The reaction to it in terms of policy and in terms of how they conduct business as usual is not what we want to see in order to meet the 1.5 degree threshold. So this is just to acknowledge that we have made a voice, repeatedly made our voices clear, but but to no avail. We're receiving the responses that we want. Hence, we're turning to the court. And by turning to the court, is really just to acknowledge that we have a right to an effective remedy. And this is why we're going to acknowledge that, acknowledging that, yes, we have tried making these arguments before our government, but now they won't listen. So we will now turn to the courts so that they can provide some assistance in ensuring that the government are held accountable for the responses that they need to make to address what we need to have in order to be able to have our rights protected from the climate crisis. Look, I also would agree with the argument on the rationale on the other hand of the panel would be, it's just why would countries sacrifice not all, just a small part of their economy and the majority of society's comfort for such issues such as climate change? Like, this is totally against public policy, I would say. But we all have to acknowledge that when we are entering perhaps the most single decade in history and prehistory of the entire Homo sapiens race, I would say, all of us, the climate crisis really has the ability and the power, and it will do so if we don't do anything about it, to end human society as we have known it. And this would result in really unprecedented suffering and decline for all economies, all people, and all society. So that is why governments need to take this more seriously and ensuring that we need to make those small sacrifices. If that's happening, if governments are not doing that, then that is why we're turning to the court, so the court can provide assistance to acknowledge that what I just said, it is public policy to address climate. It's a global public policy to address climate change. And another thing I would like to raise in regards to this question is that climate litigation is not really the end game that we're trying to see here. You can see in a gender case, even the Colombia case, and despite the successes, the political will is still not there to address the climate crisis, or it's going in a very, very slow piecemeal. What we really need is, at this moment of time, is really the changing of consciousness. And the court, on the other hand, can although play a very powerful catalyzer to bring about this change. There are still other areas that also need to do this, such as in areas of science, economy, even art itself must play its part to really rise up to the challenge of this effort. So I believe that is what we're trying to do, but climate litigation is just, of course, a powerful tool, but we have to do, other areas need to do, acknowledge that. But however, climate litigation, it is a great catalyzer to bring about, to instigate all this changing in these particular areas. So that's what I would like to add to this question. Thank you.
Great, thank you for that, Solomon. All of this has painted a really helpful overview into what the role of climate litigation can and should be. So now we have some time for questions and answers. So just another reminder to the audience that if you have questions, please submit them in the Q&A box. And the one that we have one question from the audience. So to Laura and Solomon, Redeema had to run to a class. What kind of resources, both emotional, economic, and others, you need to retain interest and stamina in youth-led climate cases like the one you're campaigning for, Solomon, and the one you're participating in, Laura? Laura, if you want to start, and then we can move to Solomon.
That's a difficult question. Because, for example, in our case, like I said in the previous intervention, it's been hard because many of the plaintiffs are getting older, and their interests are changing, and they feel, like I said before, like, yeah, it doesn't help, climate litigation doesn't help, so they're trying to do their best in other ways. So I think that some resources that we need as young people, first we need emotional support from our families, because even when our families and our lawyers and even our group of playing fits, if you're part of a group, you need like a support network, because there are days when you wake up and you say like, I need to talk about this, I need to feel like somebody give me a hug or something like that. Maybe that's one of the things you need. And I think that some people need to go to therapy even. For example, there is one of our playing fits. Her name is Urshel. Urshel is from an island in the Caribbean Sea. The name of the island is Providence, and now they are having really terrible issues with hurricanes. And we were talking to her in the past few days, and she told us, yeah, right now my home is destroyed, and we need that the government do something with the Rizal people, that is the native people of Providence. She's a Rizal. And the problem is like, yeah, we're in the continent, in South America, but we can do many things for her. But at least if she texts us, we can try to give her some emotional support. And sometimes that is what we need. And for economical support, I think that NGOs are, and the people who support us, they raise money to send us, for example, I live in Envigado, that is far away from Bogota, the capital city. So sometimes when I have to go, the Justicia brings the resources, and I think that it comes from international cooperation. And yeah, that's the way we can sustain our cause. But sometimes I feel like the most important support is emotional, and to speak to young people and tell them like, yeah, we're seeing what you're doing, and we know that sometimes it's hard, but try to keep doing what you're doing because it's important, even if you feel like it is not.
Great. Thank you for that. I think that's really important for other climate advocates, especially litigators working on these cases, to keep in mind to support the young plaintiffs. Okay, great. And so same question to you, Solomon.
Right, thank you. Really is, I'm so sorry to hear about your show. Laura, I think, yes, your show is a good friend as well, and I'm really sad
Oh
to see
yeah,
this happening as well. So
yeah.
all thoughts and hearts to her as well. Yeah, I mean, but coming back to the question is that in terms of the emotional side of the things, of course, we acknowledge that this work that we're doing is incredibly hard, I would say. For us in the campaign, we've been going on hard for like almost 3 years. Some holiday would be great, but unfortunately, that is too luxurious for us campaigners to take. But we know it's very emotionally draining, this campaign. But also what is more emotionally draining is to acknowledge that you know, if we do not do anything about this, we literally see our islands begin to deteriorate under our eyes, our communities, our aunties, our uncles, our nieces and nephews, all affected by climate change all the time. And if we really do not continue this campaign, we have given up our hopes, given up the hopes of them, of ever at least getting some remedy at the end, or at least knowing that we go down with a fight. So that is the counterbalance, I would say, for my personally on my end, really to acknowledge that, look, if we do not do something about this, there's a lot to lose. So that always holds me back. But given the, what more importantly is that given the campaign has really emerged from the Pacific, it's not something that have been introduced to us, or something that has been big INGOs have forced it down our throat to do this, but really students from the Pacific have really coming up and said, look, we're reaching out to civil society, reaching out to governments, please, we need to do this together. And we can see the result that is coming out. So in response, our communities, our civil society, all are acknowledged that this is something that is organically grown and organically campaigned, really want to do a lot of support. So they even as we are away from the region and doing the campaigning, there's still a lot of campaigning internally back at home as well to influence and keep the campaign on the agenda. So that is really reassuring. And of course, all messages of support and sometimes, you know, those little calls you have just to reassure that the people back at home are with you. That is quite comforting as well. But in terms of the economic aspect, this is quite very difficult for us as well. We're doing all this great work, making all this impact, but we have to sometimes stop, and then to write tedious application grants for grants to continue the work. And then we have to come back and do the campaign as well. So that handling both those ends has been really draining and stressful, but still, of course, coming back to the emotional part, knowing that we have to do this. So we have to go through all this, the sacrifices to be able to get this outcome. So this has been, a great big challenge, but it's not a barrier that will end our efforts. We still continue to work on this, and we're almost reaching our end game at the moment. So we're happy to see that at least our efforts are not gone in vain. Yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you for that, Solomon. And yeah, I think this is really important, both what Solomon and Laura said about the needs that young people and young activists have, and I think where older lawyers and litigators can step in to provide both economic and emotional support where possible. I think it would be really great. And with that, we're just about out of time. So I want to thank again our panelists so much for being with us, Solomon, Laura, Radima. We really appreciate it. And it was so great to hear from all of you and all about the outstanding activities you're all involved in. And thank you to our audience for joining us for this installment of CLX's Litigating the Climate Emergency. We'll have more of these discussions in the future. And until then, goodbye. Thank you.